if I told you some of the tallest, oldest living beings on Earth are hiding in plain sight, older than the Roman Empire, older than entire civilizations, and still growing today?
We spent the last few days in Redwood National and State Parks and uncovered 5 hikes that feel like 5 completely different worlds of redwoods.
From silent groves to Jurassic-looking canyons and trails where the trees hit over 350 feet tall.
These are the 5 trails that brought the redwoods to life for us.
We're J&B, and at the beginning of 2021, we hit the road. Permanently. We traded our city apartment for a constant stream of Airbnbs, new states, and places. And we wouldn't have it any other way. Come along with us as we explore all the U.S. and beyond has to offer. And join us as we continue
Living on the way.
Hello there, and welcome back to Living on the Way. This is our podcast where we share with you our lifestyle of travel and how we found location independence while having full-time jobs. And today we're actually in the Redwood National and State Parks. And we've actually been here for the last several days.
And today we're diving in deep to our top 5 hikes we've done while here. And if you've ever wondered which trails are must-dos, well, stick around. We're going to go over them. I'm Jay.
And I'm B. And these aren't in any particular order except for the fact that we started in Crescent City and then headed south along the majestic Redwood coast. So let's start with number 1, Stout Memorial Grove. And this one's in Jedediah Smith Redwood State Park. And I think backing up a second, for those who aren't aware, that Redwood National Park is actually in a long-term partnership with 3 state parks, and they all are managed together, one of them being, at the north end, Jedediah Smith Redwood State Park. And the Stout Memorial Grove, just off Howland Hill Road. And I think for us, what a surprise that road was, it's a dirt road, but it just winds through these redwoods and you see them get bigger and bigger. So we didn't even know that was coming. But
yeah, more about that trail. Immediately as you start down the trail, a giant 16, 18-foot diameter coast redwood rises up. And you feel small and you feel humble.
Right. It's at a 0.6, fairly easy loop through what is now called the Stout Memorial Grove. So it's a grove of redwoods, old growth redwoods. And there's actually a bigger, one of the biggest redwoods in this area, and they call it Stout. Or if you're calling it the Stout Memorial Grove, they call it the Big Tree. But there's other big trees, so we decided that Stout was a good name.
It's filled with many of these coastal redwoods, 300-foot plus large diameters, and it's accessible to almost all. If you can be mobile, it's got minimal elevation gain, and it's a fairly short hike. So it's a must-do.
I think it was a really good introduction to kind of redwoods. It actually even has this little path you can go off. It's a little harder, but there's this little path that goes down to the river. There's a lot of people there swimming and just kind of hanging out. So there's a lot to experience on this trail. Personal favorite is if you're going the back side of the trail, there's a bunch of trees that fell, I guess, between 2010 and 2020. And so you just see these giant redwood logs, cut out of the way, and you can just really get a scale, more so than when you're just looking up how big these trees are.
And another highlight is one of the downed ones that fell recently. I think when did it fall, B?
Within the last 5 years, because I watched a video where it was still actually upright about 4 years ago. So
it fell recently, and it's a monster.
Mm-hmm.
You can get a really up-close view of the root ball and of it laying down, but it's a very interesting, intricate look at the roots as they stick up out of the ground, and you can see how large the diameter is. Probably one of my favorite parts of the loop.
Yeah, and it's right as you get to where the loop lies, so it's right near the beginning. It is a really great start. So I think we love starting there, and just walking beneath those giant redwoods was well worth it. And it wasn't on our radar. We were actually just taking that drive to get to our next trail, which we'll get to in a second. And we like to use Guide Along, which is a audio guide. And he said it's a must-do.
And he's like, you got to get off the 101 to take this side road. And he was right. You drive right through the redwoods.
Yeah, Howland Hill Road.
It brings out the wonder in nature. It brings out the smallness of us as humans compared to the size and the age. Mm-hmm. These are 500, 1,000, 1,500, 2,000-year-old trees. It brings out awe. It brings out the feeling of wanting to know more about how something this large can live this long.
I think for me, what struck me as far as the energy goes is that how quiet it is. You're surrounded by people, and there are a fair amount of people on the trail, but just the denseness of those trees, I think it's eating up the sound. And it's just this not quite silence, but not quite loudness. So it's a very different energy as far as that goes.
Yeah, that's a good point, Bea. And that applies to all these 5 trails, just how the scale of the trees and the vastness of the forest, how it eats the sound up. So even though you're around folks It doesn't sound like you're in a concert hall or a building. It sounds like you're in a forest with spaced out
with
ability.
really good acoustics.
With really good acoustics. And acoustics in a good way, as in you can't hear the people, you hear nature.
So that leads us to our second trail, which also is in Jedediah Smith Redwood State Park, and that's Grove of Titans. And it's literally right up the road on Howland Hill Road. You get to it not long after Stout Memorial Grove.
And it's aptly named. It's a slightly harder to get around. What are the stats on that, B?
It's a 1.5 mile, so you do actually gain a little bit of elevation. I mean, actually, it was, I would say, discovered in 1998, in that when people were on a much longer hike, they could see these giant, just like thick, massive trees. So what's different about these trees is they're not as tall, they're more thick like the sequoias are, which we'll talk about why they're thick like that in a second. But in 1998, people started making their own trail, which is very detrimental to the area around it. So the National Park and State Park Services got together and opened a boardwalk style trail in 2021. And it's this metal kind of boardwalk that protects the ground around these trees and also helps with erosion and things like that.
Definitely helps us to not break up their ecosystem for the trees and those that grow around it. But this Grove of Titans, if you can get down to it, is another must-do. Scale of some of these trees is pretty large, maybe the largest in the park as far as diameter goes. They have really good access to water and nutrients in that valley, and it's definitely worth going down to, including to see what I think they labeled the big tree.
So actually, I believe it's called the Lost Monarch, and technically, she's probably the tallest, but, and this goes back to why these trees are thicker than other redwoods, is she has at the very top what they call a reiteration, or basically a cloned version of herself that she shot up one time, and that's actually the tallest part. And they don't count that; they count the initial crown, not any reiterations or clones of themselves.
Yeah, and to spend a minute on reiteration, which we just learned recently, when the coastal redwood go through a traumatic moment, they sprout a burl, and some of those then turn into an exact clone of the tree, growing partway up the tree. So not a branch, but an exact clone of the tree, but it looks like a branch, but then it keeps on growing up.
And in this area, there's these just giant, massive chunks of trees where you can't tell, is it one tree? Is it two trees? Is it a tree with a bunch of reiterations? They're just massively huge around, and the boardwalk takes you around them and really gives you an idea of the scale of them. It makes us
very thankful for the conservation efforts through the state park and the national park system to preserve these trees. As you visit these parks, you learn all about the logging industry, which in and of itself is not a bad thing. But certainly they were going through cutting down many, many, many of these redwoods, the great majority of these redwoods. It's a blessing for all the future generations, including ourselves, to be able to see these old growth, original, never cut down, 1,000, 2,000-year-old massive trees.
Yeah, and what I find interesting is the story of how the grove was found, how people were seeing it from another trail, and they were doing probably the more irresponsible thing of really trying to get to the tree. And instead of the state park or the national park shutting it down and being like, this is closed, you can't get to it, they found a way to allow people to experience these trees and also hopefully try to restore the area that was damaged as well as preserve it.
Mm-hmm.
What's it like seeing a tree that is older than a lot of civilizations?
Hard to wrap your head around something that's around for 2,000 plus years. We've experienced and thought about similar when it's brought to us when we visited Great Basin with the 3,000 plus year old trees and Sequoia with its 3,000 plus year old trees. But it's hard to fathom, 2,000 years.
When we were in Olympic, they had a ring of I think it was a Douglas, it wasn't even a redwood, but it showed the different things that this tree had experienced. And these redwoods experienced, the fall of civilizations, it was just out here living. Well, the world around them was coming and going. And I think that's fascinating.
It is fascinating and thought-provoking for sure.
So moving south down the coast a little bit, entering into the Redwoods National Park is our trail number 3, which is the Lady Bird Johnson Grove Trail. So this trail is actually where the national park was celebrated and the ceremony to start the preservation and the national park in 1968, I believe it was.
During the Lyndon B. Johnson administration, so that's where the name Lady Bird Johnson Grove came from. But this is a loop trail, winds through not just Russell Redwoods, this also has some Douglas firs, very large ones. And it's just off of Bald Hills Road, which is a very nice road, very interesting to drive up. This grove, or this part of the forest, is dedicated in honor of Lady Bird Johnson, who was instrumental in ensuring that the national park grew and preserved the redwoods.
Up into that area was completely logged, and this area was, as they say, rescued just in time. So there's a lot of growth growing as you go up Bald Hills Road. It's now all filled in. It's very dense, so it's definitely new growth. But as soon as you kind of get in that area, that's where the old growth is. My favorite feature was a pedestrian bridge that goes over the road. It just kind of has this unique, iconic look to it. But it also has some pretty big giants, and these are more tall redwoods. Not as, thick as the ones we had seen in Jedediah, but still in their own right.
Very, very worth doing. It's about a 1.5 mile loop trail, fairly easy grade, family friendly, and it has interpretive signs that you can find out more information about the stuff you're looking at as you go.
So if you can walk for about 45 minutes, the saying goes, then you should be able to do this. And it is a good introduction to the redwoods. Throughout these forests and groves, there are trees that kind of are hollowed out. A particular one on this trail, a giant tree, and had like full arch, and you could go in, and there was exits out through it. So it was very unique in its look. So I think that was kind of my favorite. Just up Bald Hills Road is our trail number 4, which is the Tall Trees Trail. And this is in the Redwood National Park. And I think the most important thing to mention is that it is only accessible if you have a permit. And we were actually lucky enough to score a permit. Do you remember how long in advance we had to do that?
Yeah, it was about 2 months in advance, but I do think it opens before then. We were just lucky enough to secure one. And once you secure one, then the day before, they'll send you a code to unlock the padlock that lets you down the rest of the road.
Right. And that road's about a 6 mile straight down, straight up, a dirt road that leads you to the parking lot. And I guess from what I understand, there's about 50 per day that they allow.
So definitely, if you're interested, which we do recommend, look as to when they open up and then secure one for the day that you'll be visiting.
Right. It's a free permit, but definitely necessary because it is a code-locked gate. And while some people say it might be worth walking that 6 miles in, 6 miles out to see this particular grove, I don't know if that's something that I want to do. So just be aware, get a permit. And the main reason is that this trail is a little bit more difficult than the others. It's just under a 4-mile round trip, and it's a trail all the way down to the grove, which is at the bottom of about a 600 or 700 foot elevation decrease. And then when you get to the bottom, there's actually a loop there that goes through these redwoods.
And these are some of the tallest redwoods in the park. In fact, at one time, it had the tallest redwood in the world in the 1990s. But then the canopy of it stopped growing, and so it's no longer the tallest, but it is some of the tallest. And I believe that there is the tallest down there somewhere. They don't reveal exactly where it is at.
Right. So the Hyperion tree is the world's tallest known living tree at over 380 feet tall, and it's often a more hidden part of the park. And they have it closed because people are trying to get there, and it's ruining the nature around it. You can't really understand the scale of how tall these trees are until you descended into this rich floodplain, and you just have towering giants.
Absolutely. You can say that twice for sure. And then the other interesting thing is why down there, there's some areas where there's quite a bit of moss growing. So it's a good feel for a blend of different nature scenes.
While we did the whole loop down there, when you're looking to go on the loop, the right side, that is where those trees are. On the left side, it's a little more fern walk, and there's a couple cool things there, but the trees are on that right side of the loop.
But that loop, once you get down to the bottom, is probably about a mile around. So it's not a very long walk once you get down the hill and before you got to hike back up it.
This hike is for the patient, but you are rewarded because by the end, you're, I would say, almost humbled and surrounded by a forest of cathedral-like silence, where, again, it goes back to what we mentioned earlier, where it almost deadens the sound. So it's almost as if you're in these human man-made cathedrals where the acoustics are keeping things quiet while still feeling the awe of the place. And so I think that's the best way to describe the descent there.
Yeah, that's a good description. And if you're lucky enough to get one of the 50 a day, that limited amount of people in there really helps you feel like you're alone in solitude, absorbing what's happening around you.
Right. And there are several other trails, so not everyone who's there is there to do the exact trail you're on. So it does allow for space. And I think that also goes back to our hack in general with national parks, is that we went after work. So we didn't get to the trail until about 3 p.m. Gives us plenty of time to hike in and out before the sun sets. But a lot of people were leaving when we were coming in. I think we saw 8 cars leaving, and that gives you a more serene hike. But don't get it twisted. This hike is legitimate because you do have to walk that 6, almost 700 elevation gain back out. And they have switchbacks, but there are some points where it's very steep. So just be aware, be prepared.
It's a light, moderate trail, so be prepared for that.
All right, and that leads us to our fifth trail. It's actually where we're on location in the area today, and that is the Fern Canyon Trail, and that is in the Prairie Creek State Park. Again, it's another permit because they want to limit the amount of cars back here. In a future episode, we'll get to why we're sitting here if you're watching our video podcast, why we're sitting on location at a campsite. You can also camp here, and it gets you the permit into this area. So a couple different ways of going about accessing the Fern Canyon Trail.
If you can get access and sign up for it or come later in the day.
Yeah, I think that's a tip we did not know.
On the way in, we saw a giant sign that said, permits required until 5 p.m. So if you came after 5 p.m., it's implied that you will not need a permit and you can drive through. Well, regardless of how you get down here, it is a very unique hike. We've done a lot of hikes, visited a lot of national parks. We've never seen one like Fern Canyon.
It features 50-foot, giant, towering, fern-covered walls. A creek is winding through these walls, and they're just mossy cliffs. And actually, I believe one of the Jurassic movies, parts of it were filmed in the Fern Canyon, so very otherworldly.
That's the right word, otherworldly. Just to see fern covered, because it's not just a couple ferns. This is tens of thousands, millions of ferns covering these walls as they scale up both sides around you. It's a very unique feeling, very fun experience. Definitely a must-do if you can get access down here.
And it gives this clear green glow almost, kind of green light, because the sun reflects off all the moss and the fern. And my personal favorite is I'm going to call them moss waterfalls. So the water is trickling down and moss is grown, and so the water comes in and out of the moss as it just slowly drips and cascades down these 50-foot walls.
Yes, it's amazing. And we were a little worried coming in. We weren't sure because we're coming here in the August time frame. We didn't know if we'd be dried out because a lot of the lands around here are dry this time of year. However, we can happily report that it is wet even this time of year. It's not a spring phenomena or winter phenomena. All year long, it's very wet and moist in there, which keeps the ferns and the moss ever growing and everything just feeling green.
There's a full loop when you get down to the creek. We actually didn't do the full loop because the other side is just another trail of walking. And I'm sure you'll see some beautiful redwoods, or we don't know. We didn't do it. But we just went to the right and went immediately into the creek and just wandered up, climbed over trees and crossed back and forth across the creek. And then when we got to where you would be climbing up and into the forest, we decided to turn around and go back through again because it's just an amazing experience. I think it was worth doing twice.
Do it either way, but for sure, that Fern Valley aspect of it is amazing. And the hike in general is a very short hike. This is not hard. This is not long. This is easily accessible from the parking lot.
In fact, it says on our All Trails that it should have taken about 30 minutes to do the whole in and the full loop around and back out. I mean, we spent 30 to 45 minutes just walking up that creek and the walls because we kept stopping and looking around, enjoying the moments.
Yeah, trying to absorb what we were saying. There are redwoods around. We did see redwoods.
Yeah, and there's downed redwoods in the actual river too.
Yep.
Creek.
They are falling down into Fern Canyon. And we saw a few standing still, but you're seeing the redwoods, but your focus is just on the mind-blowingness of these ferns and moss growing on these walls and how green and lush things really are.
And I think it also points out the fact that one of the reasons the redwoods do so well here is even though in the summer it doesn't rain as much and you'll see everything is just dusty and dry, they have the summer fog. And the fog rolls in, and that's kind of what waters the redwoods, keeps them growing and throughout the dry season. But it also comes in through these canyons, and mixed with the creek, it just gives it that lush moisture that they need to just really flourish even in a very dry time.
And we'll talk in an honorable mention, and that's Trees of Mystery, which is a highly touristy area just outside of the park. But admittedly, it was a fun walk. It had large, giant-scale Paul Bunyan and Babe of the Blue Ox talking outside of it. When you got into it, of course, there's a lot of redwoods there, hence the name Trees of Mystery. But it has walkways in and around the trees, just like you would see in Return of the Jedi with the Ewoks running around up in the treetops, and a large gondola ride. So we're glad we stopped at the Trees of Mystery on the way into the park.
And I was a little hesitant about it, but for families or just road trippers like ourselves, it's a quirky experience worth seeing. And for me personally, what kind of sold me, and I'm glad I did, was when you're walking the high walkways and then also when you're taking the gondola ride, you're up in the redwoods canopy. And that's just an experience you don't necessarily get. Sometimes when you're on these trails, you're high enough up to be kind of close to them, but there's still hundreds of feet away from you. But to really be close to the crown of a redwood, it was an experience that I think was worth the touristy aspect. And it gave you a very unique perspective. So I most likely am going to try to make YouTube short series of our experience there. So stay tuned for that if it's something you want to look into so that you know just how touristy it is versus kind of the rewards. And there's our north to south dream route for the Redwoods. From Stout Grove's friendly intro, the Titan's awe, Ladybird's artistry, Tall Trees' dedication, and the Fern Canyon's fairyland.
Yeah, all of the trails we listed, plus many more trails throughout this whole park. They really do show all the different faces, the different aspects of this redwood world. You have the ancient, you have the serene, you have the dramatic, and you have the fun and playful in between.
You can do so many trails here, but this top 5, I believe, gives a really good sense of what Jay is mentioning, all the differences. So, which would you hike first? And if you've experienced any of this, is there something we've missed or of one of our top 5 that you say is an absolute must-do, top 1 of all the trails? Let us know. We really enjoy having you along on these journeys with us, so like and subscribe where you get your podcasts. And until next time, we will be
living on the way.